Let's move on to some other issues. New South Wales Energy Minister Matt Canavan's big $32 billion vision for a renewable future could see residents again paying the price in higher power costs. As Canavan goes it alone, planning to drive investment into private renewable energy infrastructure like wind and solar farms, the federal government say they are concerned that his renewable roadmap could lead to higher electricity costs for business and households. Who better to talk to us tonight about energy? Senator Matt Canavan joins me now from Rockhampton in Queensland. I've got to ask you, Matt, a lot of discomfort from the Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor today. He's concerned that there is a lack of a cap on these costs. What do you make of them?
Well, Peter, this is just repeating the mistakes of the past. What has been announced by the New South Wales government is effectively a renewable energy target version 2. And if you remember the RET version 1, that's effectively what gave us the South Australian blackout. It gave us the early retirement of coal-fired power stations like Hazelwood, and it jacked up wholesale electricity prices by more than double. And it was the principal cause behind all the increases in power prices in the last few years, because what the New South Wales government has proposed is that we need all this investment in renewables, according to them, and so then the costs of that, we're going to put a charge on the distribution network, which will then, of course, be sheeted home via your electricity bills to every household in New South Wales. It's exactly the mistakes we made in the renewable energy target. Now, the New South Wales government says they've got modelling showing that this will lead to lower prices, but you might recall that we had modelling too, saying that the renewable energy target was going to decrease power prices, it was all going to be fine. And then, of course, we had massive spikes, we had blackouts, and I hope maybe that some common sense prevails in the New South Wales Legislative Council here when this gets debated, because it's the wrong approach. If renewables are so cheap, as we're always told, why do they need to be bailed out by a tax on New South Wales electricity consumers?
Look, yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, we've been through this circus before. It's not ended well. It's a bad movie that we keep on playing. But this mob in New South Wales is the same government stripe or colour as you are in Canberra. The idea that the federal government was not consulted by Matt Canavan I find laughable, but that's the truth. And big energy generators like AGL weren't consulted. You talk about the modelling. Well, it's as bad as Labor, Canavan's modelling, because he's hiding the modelling. We're not seeing the modelling. The federal government hasn't seen the modelling. The media hasn't seen the modelling. It's not publicly available. It's like it's like Labor Party at the last election all over again. Surely we can expect better from the Liberal government.
It's a black box in a plane crash that's yet to happen. You know, the plane hasn't crashed yet. It will.
But you know, modelling's only as good as what you put into it.
Try and examine it. Exactly, Peter. And obviously, the New South Wales government's paid for some answers here. They've paid for KPMG and the National Australia Bank as well as involved, telling us all that this will all be fine and dandy. Well, let's just remember the promises that have been made here, because they're saying they're going to have a $50 megawatt hour price out to the end of this decade. If this is the plan that they proceed with, well, there'll be one party to blame for any failure to meet that target. It'll be the New South Wales government, because we're constantly told, Peter, that solar power is the cheapest power available now. Well, why then does it need to have a charge? Why then does there need to be a charge on New South Wales consumers' bills to pay to have investment in solar power? If it's the cheapest form of power, investors will just do it because they'll make money by providing power cheaper than is the current price in New South Wales. But it does just highlight. It shows that all that's rubbish. That is all rubbish. Not even the people who promote solar power here in New South Wales. Clearly, they don't believe their own rhetoric, because they're having to put a tax on New South Wales consumers to pay for the extra costs, the higher costs of solar power.
Matt, help me understand this, because she wins at a very, very almost landslide election, certainly a good result, Anastasia Palaszczuk, and she's been incredibly tough on the borders. I think she's been cruel, beyond just tough. I think she's been cruel. But we saw in the last couple of days a little 3-year-old Queenslander die down at the Royal Children's Hospital in Victoria, has to die in Victoria, unfortunately, because he couldn't even go to a hospital of that calibre in Queensland. But because he's forced to go south for treatment, and the treatment, sadly, for the little boy didn't work, the family weren't able to bring him home so he could die at home, and they themselves could have the support of their friends and family around them. They have to now go back, they've lost their little boy, into 2 weeks of quarantine, if you can believe it, before they can go home and start putting together his funeral. When are Queenslanders going to say enough is enough to their Premier?
Look, I can't explain this heartless approach from the Queensland government. Perhaps before the election there was a view that parochialism had to prevail, and that was the way Palaszczuk was going to win. It was heartless then, though, and it's heartless now. There's no particular political contest here. The next election's not for 4 years, and whatever decisions made here is probably not going to have much difference on that. So why don't they just make decisions that have a heart here? I mean, everybody I've spoken to here today in Queensland is just shaking their heads at this approach. It just seems inflexible now. There just seems to be a level of stubbornness to it now that Anastasia Palaszczuk is revelling in, and it's coming at great cost to families who face tragedies. These tragedies happen. They happen every day, unfortunately. But as governments, we should not be making life harder for people in those difficult circumstances.
No, and I don't think Queenslanders are as heartless as their Premier. I think Queenslanders are probably as ashamed as the rest of the country is. But this is where I hope there is some change. I genuinely hope there's change. I don't want the politics in it. I just want her to change. I think it's cruel. Anyway, you're a dad of 5.
Absolutely.
You know that better than anyone. Got to leave it there. Thank you for your time, Matt.
Thanks, Peter. Have a good
quick
evening.
Break.